She never said no, not outright. That was Megan's thing. Her indecision wasn't a flaw, it was a strategy. A softly spoken maybe, a delayed text reply, a rain check that turned into weeks of silence. It always kept me close, tethered to her life without ever being let in fully. I used to think that was patience. Now I know it was her way of keeping me on standby. It started innocently enough. Megan was magnetic. 38, fiercely independent and wrapped in a quiet kind of sadness that made you want to save her. I fell hard. At 44, I thought I'd outgrown this kind of longing, but with Megan, it felt like something new. She didn't need me, and maybe that's why I wanted her to. I was always available. Text at 2 a.m., I'd answer. Need help moving her friend's couch? I'd rent a truck. Emotional breakdown after a bad day? I'd listen, reassure, even if my own day had been a disaster. I wasn't just in love with her. I was invested. She had my loyalty, my consistency. But she gave back only fragments. We never had a clear conversation about what we were. Instead, she'd pepper our time together with phrases like, "I'm just figuring things out right now," or "I don't want to rush anything." I respected that. Everyone moves at their own pace. But weeks turned into months, and I remained in this purgatory. Close enough to matter, never close enough to count. Her pattern was predictable. She'd disappear for days, then pop back in with a text like, "Hey, miss your voice." I used to smile when I saw that. I'd call her immediately, eager to hear her laugh. She had this laugh, throaty, real, that made everything feel worth it. But it always ended the same way. No plans for the weekend, no commitment, no answers. Just lingering possibilities. Friends started to notice first. "You're always waiting on her," my buddy Tom said one night over beers. "She's not waiting on you." I shrugged it off then, but the truth had already been gnawing at me. There was a Saturday I won't forget. We were supposed to go to a gallery opening, something she loved. I even took off work early, bought a new jacket because she once mentioned liking that deep navy color. At 6:42 p.m., I got a text. "Hey, something came up. Rain check?" I waited an hour before responding. Not out of spite, just because I was tired. Tired of dressing up for someone who couldn't show up. That night, I didn't reply at all. That was the first time the silence was mine. It didn't change anything right away, but it planted a seed. Megan's indecision wasn't about needing time, it was about control. She kept me on standby, not because she didn't know what she wanted, but because she knew I'd always be there while she figured it out. What she didn't know was this: even the most loyal man eventually stops answering the call. The problem with always being there for someone is that, over time, they start believing you always will be. Megan had a way of making me feel needed, just enough to keep me hanging on. But as the months passed, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger at first. It was more subtle. A quiet disappointment that settled in my chest like dust on forgotten furniture. I began to notice the pattern more clearly. She would vanish when it mattered, then reappear just when I'd started to emotionally detach. Her timing was uncanny, like she could sense when I was pulling away, only to reel me back in with a late-night text, a soft voice message, or a picture of us from a happier time. It was never a full apology or acknowledgement of the distance. It was always a breadcrumb, something small to reset the cycle. What made it worse was how effortless it seemed for her. I would spend hours crafting texts, rewriting messages so they didn't sound too needy, too angry, too vulnerable. Meanwhile, Megan could send a single word, "Hey," and it would undo all my resolve. It wasn't just about attention. It was about placement. She had a priority list, and I wasn't at the top of it. I might not have even been second. I was somewhere in the middle, depending on her mood, her needs, her fears. When Megan was sad or uncertain, she turned to me. She said I calmed her, that I felt like home. But when she was happy or busy, when things were going well in her world, I barely heard from her. It was like I existed only to soothe the storms, but was forgotten during the sunlight. I started to feel more like an emotional utility than a partner. Used when needed, shelved when not. There was a night that crystallized it all. I had just finished a long day at work, the kind that drains you right down to your bones. I came home to silence, as usual, poured myself a whiskey, and sat on the couch, scrolling through social media. That's when I saw her story. Megan, out with friends, laughing, glowing, living. Not once had she mentioned it to me. Earlier that day, she had ignored my message, asking if she wanted to grab dinner. It wasn't jealousy. I didn't begrudge her the fun. It was the realization that I didn't even cross her mind. She had made space in her life for other people, but never carved any for me. When we were together, it was as if she needed me to plug some emotional gap. But she never truly invited me into her world. I knew her stories, but not her friends. I supported her dreams, but she rarely asked about mine. I knew her favorite coffee order by heart, but she couldn't remember the name of my business. And still, I stayed. Not because I was weak. Not because I didn't see what was happening. I stayed because hope is a powerful thing. We convince ourselves that if we just give a little more, wait a little longer, they'll finally see our worth. But what we don't realize is that every day we wait in silence. We teach them how little they need to give to keep us around. My friends saw it long before I did. "She doesn't value you, man," Tom said again one evening. "You show up like a husband, and she treats you like a placeholder." I didn't want to believe it. I made excuses. For her. She's been hurt before. She's guarded. She needs time. But at some point, I had to ask myself the hard question. What if I'm not the one she's waiting for? What if I'm just the one who makes the wait easier? That thought hit harder than I expected. Because if I wasn't her person, then who was I to her? A habit? A fallback? A warm voice in the cold hours? Whatever the answer, it wasn't love. Not the kind I deserved. The truth is, I started losing pieces of myself in the pauses between her messages. I lost count of how many plans I put on hold, how many moments I spent staring at my phone, refreshing, rereading, rethinking. I had bent over backwards so many times that I forgot what it felt like to stand tall. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. At this point, it was grief. Grief for the version of the relationship I thought we had. Grief for the love I gave so freely, only to watch it evaporate into thin air, unanswered and unappreciated. And perhaps most painfully, grief for the man I used to be. The one who believed that love, when given earnestly, would always be enough. There wasn't a single dramatic moment that made me leave. No final fight, no shouting match, no teary goodbye. It didn't happen like in the movies. What finally made me step away wasn't some explosive confrontation. It was something far simpler. It was the silence. One Friday evening, I sent her a message. Something casual. I asked if she wanted to get dinner the next night. No flowers, no pressure, just a simple request to spend time. Hours passed. Then a full day, no reply. By Sunday morning, still nothing. But by noon, she posted a photo of her brunch, eggs Benedict, a mimosa, and the caption, "Sundays are for self-care." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly set the phone down on my kitchen table. That was it. Not the post itself, but the clarity it gave me. I had been trying to show up in someone's life who didn't even notice I'd left the room. That morning, I didn't rage or cry. Instead, I went for a walk. The air was crisp, the streets unusually quiet. It was in that quiet that the decision formed. Not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. I didn't need to make a point or stage a dramatic exit. I just needed to stop showing up for someone who never truly met me halfway. I didn't send a goodbye message. I didn't block her. I didn't unfollow or delete her photos. I simply stopped. I let the messages go unanswered. The calls unreturned. I stopped initiating, stopped hoping. I chose something I hadn't chosen in months. Myself. At first, it felt unnatural. I'd built my days around her schedule, her moods, her silences. It was strange to wake up and not wonder whether she'd text. It felt foreign not to scan through her social media or replay old voice messages just to hear her tone. But as the days passed, that strange emptiness began to shift. What once felt like absence started to feel like peace. I didn't even realize how much noise she brought into my life until it was gone. The guessing games, the emotional limbo, the wait-and-see dance. Without it, I could breathe again. I started sleeping better, eating better. I found energy I didn't know I had lost. I reconnected with friends I had unintentionally neglected. I visited my mother. I fixed the leaky faucet that had been dripping for weeks. I lived. Megan, on the other hand, noticed eventually. At first, she did what she always did. Waited. She must have assumed I was busy or distracted, as I often was with work. But after a week, the texts started to come in again. First it was, "Hey, stranger." Then a few days later, "Been thinking about you." And then, "Are you okay?" I saw them all. But I didn't respond, not because I wanted to hurt her. I wasn't playing games. I had simply crossed a line within myself. The version of me who chased her approval was gone. The man who made excuses for her, who tolerated being placed on emotional layaway, that man had closed the door and walked away. There was no animosity in my silence, just resolution. I wasn't unreachable to be cruel. I was unreachable because I finally understood that showing up for someone who never truly opened the door was the most self-destructive thing I could do. I had made myself available for so long, believing that one day she would see my worth. But I no longer needed her to see it. I had finally started to see it myself. People talk about closure like it has to come from a conversation, a final chapter where both people sit across from each other and unpack everything. But sometimes closure comes from making peace with what you'll never hear. Sometimes it's choosing to walk away even when the door's still ajar, because you've realized the room behind it was never yours to begin with. Weeks passed. The messages became more frequent, more concerned. Then came the missed calls. A voicemail I didn't listen to. An email titled, "Can we talk?" But the answer was already written in my silence. I had given her countless opportunities to meet me in the middle, and she had always chosen to keep me waiting. So now I had chosen not to wait anymore. What surprised me the most wasn't the guilt or the doubt, which I thought would come, but the calm, the profound, steady calm of knowing I was no longer living in someone else's emotional waiting room. For the first time in a long while, my life belonged to me again. People say detachment is cold. I think it's honest. It's what happens when you finally recognize that loving someone doesn't always mean you're meant to stay. Sometimes it means letting go so you can rediscover what it feels like to be whole, to be at peace, to be home within yourself. I didn't become unreachable to prove a point. I became unreachable because I was tired of proving mine. For the first time in over a year, the power between us wasn't tipped in her favor. Not because I fought for it, not because I demanded it, but because I stopped handing it over. At first, Megan reacted with indifference, or maybe denial. She was used to me taking breaks, short ones. I'd go quiet for a day or two, needing space, and she knew I'd return. I always did, but this time was different, and it didn't take long for her to notice. A few days into my silence, she sent a simple text. "Hey, are we good?" It was the kind of message designed to pull me back in. Not too vulnerable, not too committed. A vague olive branch. In the past, I would have jumped at it, grateful for any breadcrumb. But now I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had nothing left to say that wouldn't cost me another piece of myself. She followed up the next evening with a voice message. Her voice was soft, uncertain, like she wasn't sure how much of me was still reachable. "I've just been thinking about you. A lot. I miss you. Can we talk soon?" I listened to it once, then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Megan had spent so long speaking without listening, reaching without truly holding. I didn't owe her another conversation just because she finally noticed the silence. When you stop chasing someone, they have two choices: forget you or come looking. Megan chose the latter, but not all at once. The first week was tentative, the second more urgent. By the third, her attempts weren't just digital. She began appearing in my world again. One afternoon, I walked out of my office building to find her leaning against the hood of her car across the street. She didn't wave. She just stood there, arms folded, waiting. I didn't cross. I didn't even slow down. I turned and walked the other way, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed to hear what she had to say. That moment rewrote everything between us. She wasn't the one walking away anymore. I was. The man who had once waited endlessly for her attention had become the man who no longer looked back. And that absence, that shift, was louder than any argument we could have had. Megan started texting more often. I've been thinking about everything. About us. Then, I know I took you for granted. Then finally, please don't shut me out. But none of it reached me in the way she wanted it to. The irony was cruel but just. She was finally giving me what I had begged for, and I no longer wanted it. That's the thing about power. It doesn't come from control, it comes from choice. And I had made mine. Megan's attempts grew more emotional. She left a letter in my mailbox, handwritten, pages long. I read the first few lines, scanned the rest, then filed it away. Not to forget, but to remind myself how far I'd come. Her words didn't move me the way they used to. They felt like echoes in a room I had already left. For so long, I had been afraid that walking away would make me feel hollow, that without her I'd be empty. But instead, I felt full. For the first time in a long time. Full of presence, full of clarity, full of myself in the best possible way. I didn't need Megan to validate my worth anymore. I didn't need her to choose me for me to feel chosen. And that was the real shift. You see, Megan hadn't just lost my attention, she had lost her influence over me. The emotional real estate she once occupied had been reclaimed. She no longer lived rent-free in my thoughts. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped wondering who she was with or if she missed me. I stopped caring about whether she'd ever come around. This was the quiet liberation no one talks about. The moment when you no longer need closure because your absence becomes its own. I never raised my voice. Never slammed a door. I just stopped responding. And in that space, she was left to hear the echo of her own choices. Megan kept reaching out in different ways. An old playlist she'd curated sent to my inbox. A favorite book mailed to my apartment with a note inside. Thought you might need this. Each gesture came too late, like trying to water a plant long after it's died. My silence wasn't revenge. It was recovery. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting me. People think power is about control, about who wins. But the truth? Power is peace. Power is presence. It's the ability to walk away not because you want them to chase you, but because you've finally stopped chasing them. And Megan? She never expected that silence could scream louder than all my pleading ever did. She never imagined I could become the one who wouldn't answer. But she taught me that silence is where self-worth lives. I had spent so long being her maybe. Now I had become her never. In the end, it wasn't the unanswered texts or missed calls that defined the aftermath. It was the stillness that followed. No more waiting, no more hoping, no more rereading conversations for signs of affection that were never really there. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel suspended between decisions. I was grounded in my own. Megan faded slowly like fog lifting from a shoreline. She stopped, reaching out. Or maybe she didn't. I just stopped noticing. I no longer gave her the space to exist in my mind. I had reclaimed it for better things. For myself. It's strange, the way people assume closure has to come from the person who hurt you. That it has to be this mutual meeting of hearts and minds. But the truth is, sometimes closure comes in the form of waking up and realizing that you no longer ache in the places they touched. That their absence doesn't sting. It soothes. I didn't hate her. I didn't carry bitterness. What I carried was a deep understanding of what I had allowed and what I would never allow again. That was my real closure, not her apology, not her regret, but the quiet dignity of choosing myself after so long, putting someone else's comfort above my worth. Life after Megan wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle. I started walking more. Mornings became rituals again, not just filler time spent waiting for a message that never came. I read books I had put off. I picked up cooking again, not for anyone else, but for the joy of creating something with my hands. My friends noticed it first, that I laughed more freely, that my energy had returned. Tom said it best one evening. You've got your color back. And I had. Not because I'd found someone new to give my love to, but because I finally gave it back to myself. There was no revenge body, no desperate rebound, no attempt to show her what she'd lost. I wasn't interested in proving a point anymore. I was interested in peace, in building a life that didn't revolve around someone's indecision, in remembering who I was before I became someone's emotional safety net. One evening, I passed the coffee shop where Megan and I used to meet. I stopped for a moment, not because I missed her, but because I didn't. I stepped inside, ordered my usual, and sat by the window where we used to talk for hours. The seat across from me was empty, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole, because that's the real aftermath of healing. Not vengeance, not validation. Wholeness. I never heard a final word from Megan. No big goodbye, no grand explanation. Just silence. And that was okay. Her story in my life had ended, not with punctuation, but with space. A clean break. A quiet close. I realized I didn't need the last word. I already had the last choice. Now, when I think about what we were, I don't feel regret. I feel clarity. She taught me how easily love can be mistaken for obligation, and how dangerous it is to settle for someone who sees your presence as a convenience rather than a gift. She kept me on standby. And I became unreachable, not to spite her, but to return to myself. And in doing that, I finally became something else entirely, untethered, unburdened, and undeniably free.